Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast for the second recap ever of Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift. Now Zwift coming on as title sponsor for the event. Unfortunately, I am a bit cursed this year in the previews. Riders should be paying me not to pick them. Marianne Vos, who was my pick for this race, unfortunately tested positive for COVID and she couldn't participate. So that's one sprinter type who came second last year that couldn't ride. Big shame. Trek had a very, very strong team despite last year's winner, Lizzie Deignan, not being here. They had Longo Borghini, Balsamo, the world champ, Van Dijk, and Lucinda Brandt, who didn't race last year. So it was them, SD Worx, the two heavyweights going head-to-head. As a reminder of the parcours for Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift, from Denain to Roubaix, the velodrome, the finale is identical to the men's race. They do 18 cobbled sectors. It starts after Arenberg with the Hornaing-Vendigny sector, and then it's all the same, Monson-Pavel, Carfon-en-Favel, Carrefour de l'Arbre, etc. All those 5-star sectors before finishing in the velodrome. But Benji, we had a Zwift Academy winner, Tanya Erath for EF Education Tibco in the break, looking good.
Yes, for sure. Like, we don't often see an instant breakaway get 2 minutes in women's race that often, and this time around it was instantly that a break went with 5 riders, including Tanya Erath. And another thing to note about her is that I swear she was the one that crashed in the women's tour that had 2 broken vertebrae last season, and to see her come back, be in the breakaway in Roubaix, and be the last remaining survivor of that breakaway on today's race is it's inspirational for people coming back from injuries. So that's pretty cool to see. But stuff was happening in the peloton. The second we reached the first cobble section, we went to Hornaing-Vendigny, which is the first one. Ellen van Dijk straight to the front of the peloton, hammering that front. The initial parts, we saw splits already, the group just splitting in two on the first cobble section. That's what we see in Paris-Roubaix, and I love it. And she kept doing that in the first few cobble sections, and I was curious, like, is this a strategy to try and make it hard enough to cause splits, but not hard enough so that Balsamo could follow? Did you see any strategy in it?
I think Trek we got the strongest team. They have 3 or 4 riders who can win solo. They have, I'm not sure if Van Anrooy started or not, but they then also have Balsamo for the sprint. I think those riders, those top guns, have done a lot of work for Balsamo this season. They've sacrificed their own opportunities. Trofeo Alfredo Binda being the big example for Longo Borghini, who won it last year and waited for Balsamo on the final climb this year. I think there was a little bit of, we're going to ride our race, and if Elisa keeps up, Elisa Balsamo that is, that's great. We'll ride for her in the finale, but we're not going to ride a passive race, have her dropped on Carrefour de l'Arbre and Kopecky win a sprint. So that's me reading into it. I could also just be making that up. It was good to see. All the cobble sectors were televised this year, so the race has made big steps this year. Whether that's due to Zwift's title sponsorship, I'm not sure. I'm sure it doesn't hurt at all. Longer coverage, bigger prize pool. It's taking steps in the right direction, similar to the sort of Flanders Classics model that Van den Spiegel said it's all a part of a process. But what was next, Benji? We started to hit puncture galore territory.
Yes, certainly. And it was noticeable that Trek was keeping that up until Trek couldn't keep it up because one of their riders had a puncture, and it was the rider that had been pacing already for quite a while, Ellen van Dijk. At the same exact moment, the crash happens in the middle of the bunch, including Norsgaard for Movistar. So 2 riders that could compete for the victory here are now behind in the race. Norsgaard not as far as Van Dijk was, because I swear it took like 4 or 5 minutes for Van Dijk to get assistance, and the reason is, obviously, she just split the peloton in 20 pieces on the cobble sections, and the cars can't pass every single one of these groups, so the cars are very far behind. But there's like this guy swinging a wheel at the end of each cobble section for the team, so she needs to ride on until after the cobble section to get that wheel change, or wait where she is to wait for the car. And that's a dilemma riders need to make in Roubaix, the decision on whether to wait for the car or keep driving on a bike that is simply not complete. They've got a flat tire, and she chose to keep on riding towards the end of that cobble section. She lost quite a bit of time there, and honestly, at that point in the race, I was like, Van Dijk, I think this is the end. Like, this is early on in the race, but it's already starting to open up at the front. And did you consider a comeback possible?
I thought she'd be able to come back but be completely spent. Um, she would have had to go through so many groups. There was so many cars in the way. Yeah, it was a bad time to have a mechanical. Cavalli had a mechanical later, which actually didn't cost as much because she had it, rode to the end of a sector, got the change done, away she
Yeah.
went. Um, and so, yeah, mechanicals, maybe, I'm not sure if they were less or more than last year's wet edition. It seemed to be, it was a completely different race compared to last year's wet edition. Bigger groups, more attacks later in the race. I think personally much more exciting. But before we get into the meat of this race, mention our show partners Zwift, as well as sponsoring LRCP and Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift. Zwift are also the title sponsor of Tour de France Femmes for the next 4 years. Today marks 100 days until the start of Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift, and Zwift and us are calling on fans to watch the Femme as the women's peloton takes on the TDF for the first time in decades. You may have seen that campaign rolled out across social media in the last few days. Zwift are also giving people the opportunity to win a VIP bike tour to watch Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift on the ground in Paris. Just join the hashtag New Rules mission and ride 100 Ks in game between now and 15th of May, about a month, for your chance to win. For more information on how Zwift are working to grow a stronger and more inclusive community and how they're helping develop women's pro cycling, T's and C's on the competition, or to dive in and start riding with a free 7-day trial, head to Zwift.com through the link down below. But the punctures didn't end there, Benji. More. Balsamo in a bad time.
Yeah, Trek was collecting punctures like they were Pokemon cards, and let's be honest, it was only their 2 leaders at that point. Hosking had already crashed earlier as well, so they were losing riders left and right. And it really wasn't until Orchi where the action in the group started happening once again, and it was there that eventually Balsamo also got that puncture. Block was the one for SD Worx doing some action on Orchi, but there was no serious damage there. Next to the fact that the breakaway Tanya Araf, the leftover rider up the front, was caught at that point in the race. We get to Orchi, which is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated sectors on Paris-Roubaix, because yes, it's a 4-star sector, but there's always someone from the favorites that attacks. And right here, it was not Chantal Black for SD Worx, but Kopecky that decided to go for a move, and it was a move that kept on sticking for a bit. Bastianelli followed, and then Brand eventually, a bit later, bridges from the group behind towards those two riders, and the gap goes up to like 18-ish seconds after that, but it didn't really go much harder than that. It didn't really expand that much, but then we started getting some news about Balsamo, right?
Yeah, it came through over the race radio that she'd been disqualified from the race, and we had to go back and look at footage afterwards. We'll talk about that, I think, after the race, the Eckhoff 2.0 scenario. But that meant that Trek no longer had a sprinter to really ride for, so they were more incentivized to have a very open race and really to ride against Kopecky. So no Vos, Vibus dropped, Balsamo dropped. The Bastianelli was nowhere to be seen after her attack or following Kopecky on Orchiles or she. So it's all on Kopecky as the fast rider. She's going to be attacked. Norsgaard wasn't looking that good either. Kopecky's group gets caught, and we're waiting for what we've seen for the best part of a decade in cycling, the SD Worx counter from Majerus, from Chantal van der Broek-Black, from someone else. And it didn't come from them. It came from Trek after that. Longo Borghini with 33 Ks to go goes. And I think, I'm not sure who initiated it. She was with Black and Norsgaard, but then she eventually dropped the other two, the Italian national champion. And
Yep.
the problem for SD Worx, Benji, was they had no one really to pace. Chantal van der
Yeah,
Broek-Black had been
certainly.
dropped, and Kopecky didn't want to ruin her own race.
Yeah, I just want to correct her. That was my mistake in the notes. It was Cecchini, not Block, that reacted. But again, those two riders went up the road, like you said, and then eventually Longo Borghini just kept on attacking those two and was like, okay, she keeps on going. And perhaps the mistake is that Block is not the one responding and that Cecchini was the one responding for SD Worx. So that's the intriguing aspect there. Did they react to Longo Borghini with the wrong rider? And as a consequence, basically, not react soon enough with a rider that can actually compete with her. And the question there is, perhaps they underrated Longo Borghini after, in the last few weeks, working for the likes of a Balsamo all the time, dropping back on climbs and so forth to pace her. And that's why I think they might not have reacted with a rider of, for example, a Kopecky or, for example, a Block, stuff like that. But you're right, Longo Borghini got a bit of a gap, and I honestly at the start thought there's so many teams behind, this is likely going to be caught. Like, it's a 10-second gap, 15-second gap, then became a 20-second gap, a 25-second gap. And I started getting nervous, and it became more and more. And it started feeling like the gap was existing, and she kept on riding at a similar tempo as the riders that were chasing her in the group behind. And then it started becoming something that I could believe in. At what point did you think, okay, Longo Borghini could actually make something happen here?
Pretty fast, because SD Worx weren't reacting, FDJ weren't pulling, DSM had 4 riders in the group, didn't pull straight away, with Mackay running for 5 for Georgie or vice versa, and it was Movistar doing a lot of pacing, but Movistar had been very active early in the race, and I think Norsgaard was dropping. So then I was like, well, I didn't see Majerus. There's no Marlon Royster at this race. I'm not sure if she's unwell or going for the Ardennes, but the big engine's not here. So I was like, this is a problem. There's also tailwind, and it must be said, although this has happened frequently, Longo Borghini got some moto help, not her fault, take advantage of it. We almost know by now it's the advantage. If you go clear early and there's no reaction and you get 20, 25 seconds, then that moto will be a big help. Like on one of the sectors later, they got it to like 11 seconds, 10 seconds, finished the end of the cobbles, and then that moto dragged it out a little bit more. But she was obviously incredibly strong as well. Luckily for Trek, no further puncture issues after the Balsamo puncture. But Benji, you're Belgian, allegedly. Sometimes I doubt it. Sometimes I don't know if you are. Black and Kopecky. We saw it. What was the race before this? Where Vanderbroek Black rode Flanders. Kopecky was 100% leader. They rode for her. Vanderbroek Black let her out. Domestique roll. Today I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand what the plan was. I thought the plan should clearly be get Kopecky to the velodrome with no Balsamo, with no Vibers, and you got like 90% chance of winning.
Yeah, I agree that was a strategy that would be the likeliest. Or if you have an outnumbering value compared to the other teams, then you can try and roll the tags. But that was not the case in the group that they were in, because they still had Brandt and Van Dijk, who came back after that puncture she had earlier. So yeah, Trek was there with a lot of riders in their wheel. And when they go into Sisouin Bourgel, they have Kopecky lead out Block, and Block makes a move and splits up the group behind with Kopecky in a group behind. And that was a curious fact where it felt like they were riding for Block at that point in the race. And that brings me back to the interview of Kopecky, I think a few days ago, where she said she was going to domestique for Block at this race, that I did not believe at all, to be honest. But it turned out to be okay on this cobble section, that strategy, because Block was trying to close it, and she actually closed it quite a bit towards the Longo Borghini. It was down to like 15 seconds, 14 seconds, something like that. But it seemed like 2 FDJ riders were in our wheel, and also Georgie was also in that group, and Block was not going to close that alone, so looked at the others in that group to do it, and FDJ took over once, but not necessarily too much more. And do you think that the other teams perhaps made a mistake putting it all on Block there?
Yeah, I think so. I think Cavalli should have helped a little bit and been, the problem is Longo Borghini up the road, but also SD Worx made the miscalculation in that I don't mind that Black Kopecky move if the gap is 8 seconds and ELB is coming back and looks terrible. But 25, you're not going to close it. And we'll see that in the men's race tomorrow on Arenberg. Like, if the gap is 30, there's no point trying to bridge to the break on a cobbled sector. If it's less, maybe you can. But yeah, I don't mind it if it was shorter, but they needed to close it to 10 seconds and then start to try and work over Trek, because Van Dijk was not looking as good at that point and they were dropping her. She got stronger and stronger as she presumably recovered from that huge bridge to get back to them. So eventually that goes clear. Vanderbroek Black sits up. The next sector, they change roles. We're in the Confond en Favel, Carrefour de l'Arbre phase, the last 2 real hard cobbled sectors. Van der Black launches Kopecky, the exact mirror image of what had happened
Yeah.
previously, but the gap is still 25,
Yep.
puts 6-7 seconds into it, and then she stops and waits up for Van der Black. And so this race was a wrap after Carrefour de l'Arbre. 30 seconds, not happening.
Yep, certainly. And the intriguing aspect that I found the weirdest was we get over Carrefour de l'Arbre, we've got a bit of a gap after Kopecky hammers that Carrefour de l'Arbre, and obviously, like you said it, they wait on block at that point after that to have block pace Kopecky afterwards, but it was also that Kopecky just sat up while Cavalli was doing quite some work just after Carrefour de l'Arbre, where I'm like, you might as well just work together a bit to keep Cavalli into a state of mind to keep on working, because otherwise you're not going anywhere. And then they decided to completely wait for a block. And yeah, perhaps it was an idea to wait for a block, but the gap was 30-40 seconds. You're right. The race was over, and we were going to be seeing Elisa Longo Borghini go through that last Willems Ahem section where they've got those like yellow black blocks on the left side of the road where every single rider tries to evade the cobbles and evade the blocks and evade the cobbles and evade the blocks and tries not to crash. But yeah, all in all, that was going to be the end of this race, right?
It must be said that Brand and Van Dijk, it must have been demoralising for SD Worx and Kopecky to see them on her wheel all the time. But 30 seconds goes to 40 when they wait for Van der Black, and Elisa Longo Borghini, not slowing down, enters the velodrome solo and wins in the Italian national champs jersey after a compatriot was DSQ'd the second time in a row. Trek the only winners of Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift so far. Huge win. Kopecky won the bunch sprint for second, as predicted, ahead of Brand. Shabby and Cavalli and Mackay had not worked with SD Worx. Kopecky and Van der Black had rolled turns in the last 10Ks, which is largely just road surface. They hadn't contributed, and they ended up 4th, 5th, and 6th. So, yeah, didn't really help. Van Dijk, 7th. Van der Black dropped a little bit at the end, 8th. Then Pfeiffer Georgie and Sandra Alonso for Ceratizit, their best rider, with Lisa Brennauer out with sickness or injury from memory. So unfortunate for Ceratizit. But another great win for Trek, Benji. And I think they had bad luck, or maybe their tyres aren't actually the best. Didn't matter. I think 40Ks to go, 35Ks to go. I don't see really how SD Worx can win this race, even if they played all their cards right. We talked about tactics a little bit. Let's say they do work well and they bring back ELB. They're just going to get countered by Brand or Van Dijk. And without Majerus there or Reusser, I don't see them beating Trek here.
Yeah, I agree, and I dare to say that despite Longo Borghini being up the road and being one of the stronger riders, that I'd argue that Lucinda Brand was perhaps the strongest rider in this race, or Van Dijk, knowing that she punctured and had to chase back for a very long time with nobody helping her in that chase. Well, unironically, I can't talk anymore after Roubaix Day, but Jesus Christ, unironically, yeah, I'm struggling. I unironically think that you are right in that, where Trek would either way have won, whether Longo Borghini was caught or not, regardless of any tactics that SD Worx do, except for the fact that they might have had an opportunity if they put the other rider, not Cecchini, onto the wheel of Longo Borghini's attack. And that's a split decision. That's something that happens in the snap of a finger, that decision. And yeah, it's a small thing, but it could have led to that attack not even going. And therefore, Trek having to attack SD Worx instead of SD Worx having to chase down Trek.
Yeah, and even so, you say that, but then it's like, okay, well, if you draw it up on the bus, don't you say Kopecky on Balsamo or Van Dijk, and then Brand is marked by Chantal Van der Black, and so then it has to be Majerus or Cecchini marking Elisa Longo Borghini as you go down the depth chart. So Trek was stacked. They didn't even, again, I should check if they had Van Anrooy here or not. She wasn't pivotal in the finale.
I don't think so.
But she would have been even more insane if she was in their squad. I do wonder why Reusser wasn't here. And I also think Vos not being here hurt Kopecky a lot. It's another rider that would have wanted a sprint, would have been maybe helped SD Worx bring back the ELB move. And we see in Roubaix if you just keep that gap every time, if you finish the cobble sector, if you're in the move ahead and it's at 10 seconds, just go full gas on the road surface and just trust that the group will not work too well behind,
Yeah.
and you can extend it back out to 25, and then that elastic effect. But yeah.
By the way, I think it also had an effect that on Carrefour de l'Arbre, or was it Confin en Pavel, where X was still in that group with Kopecky and Black, with two riders, Susanna Anderson and Julie Leff, ended up crashing each other out on the cobble sections by accident, obviously. So if that doesn't happen, then you might have another team with a rider or two riders in that move ahead, because Susanna Anderson would likely also like a sprint at the end of this race. It could have had an effect on the outcome of the race. It eventually didn't, but that's a team that definitely did not get the result they wanted after riding relatively strong until those crashes. Anything else to add for this race except for our discussion about Balsamo?
Yeah, let's get into that. Cats off to Trek, by the way, and SD Worx ruining their losses. But yeah, not all smooth sailing for Trek, with Elisa Balsamo disqualified. It came through. No one was really surprised. When I was watching, she had this puncture. The peloton was hammering it. It was middle of these cobbled sections. She had the puncture, and then she was back 3 seconds behind the peloton, I swear, like 3 minutes later. Whereas Van Dijk had taken ages to return, Cavalli took ages to return. I was like, how has she made it back so quickly to the peloton? Well, the answer was we saw two things. First of all, she took like there's sticky bottles, and then there's like literally holding the car for over 5 seconds, and we saw her hold the sticky ball, and they were going past other riders like 3 times the speed. So usually the sticky bottle, if you do it that long and the comment says see it, you're going to get done and DSQ'd. And then also she was drafting behind the Trek car for a long time, right behind it. And this wasn't when they were in the convoy, so it was behind. So that's the Niels Eckhoff 2019 World Champs DSQ as well. Or what he did and got disqualified for. So, I mean, unlucky she had the puncture, Benji, but the sticky bottle was what for me flipped it to like she had to go for that.
Yeah, certainly. I think someone on Twitter said it was 12 seconds in total. I didn't calculate it myself, but 12-second sticky bottles are pretty damn long. And yes, every team tries to slip in some sticky bottles when riders are behind, but when you do it for 12 seconds and get caught for it, then it's your own damn fault. But then the question arises, is it Balsamo's fault for having that sticky bottle happen, or do you consider DDS, which I would argue has more of a responsibility as the real perpetrator of this villainous act in the race, a 12-second sticky bottle, because that DS should know the rules better as a X-Rider. I think it is Teutenberg in the car for Trek. I could be wrong in that, so let's hope I'm right. But on paper, I'd say the DS has more of a responsibility. Do you agree?
It might be Bronzini. I can't remember. She's at Live. It says according to PCS. But yeah, I don't know who has to withdraw it. Does the director have to withdraw it, or the rider let go? Probably the rider let go. I think the thing is, Benji, what's the downside? If she doesn't do the sticky bottle plus the car, she doesn't make it back. And so you just be like, okay, 50% chance we get disqualified here, and which is the same outcome as if we don't do it, she never makes it back. So
Would she not? Because
she was
I
pretty far
swear,
back.
3 minutes after the DQ was announced, she was at the back of the group. And I was like, okay, she returned. So I'm thinking perhaps it was not necessarily that far behind that the sticky bottle happened. And it's not really possible to know how close it was, but I dare to say that she probably could have had a chance of coming back.
Well, I don't know. It like she literally was holding the bottle, flying past other riders like 55 k's an hour next to the car, and then she was like right behind the car on the cobbles drafting. I don't know. Like that's the trade-off that teams make for Eckhoff as well. It's like he probably wouldn't have come back without it. I still am 50-50 about. I've waxed and waned about this for a couple of years about why can you draft a car on the convoy, but you can't draft a car after a mechanical or a puncture or a crash. when the car's behind the convoy. I guess because it can go faster than the group ahead, so it brings you
Yeah.
back. So that's the reason why. But yeah, fair enough that she was disqualified. Sometimes wearing the world champs bands is a curse. I think this is definitely one of those occasions because you're always going to have a camera on you,
Yep.
and I see stuff like this happens all the time, and doesn't get punished. Maybe not the sticky, but yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said about that one. Only other news today was at Tour of Turkey, Jay Vine, Nicola Ede, and Bevan attacked Sepulveda, who was leading GC on like a 7K, 4%, 5% climb. Went solo. Not solo. There's three of them. They went clear. Androni couldn't close it, nor Bike Exchange for Groves. And Bevan ended up actually winning the stage. Despite pulling hard for GC, 2 seconds ahead of Vine. They both move into first and second on GC. If Bevan holds that, some much needed points for Israel Startup Nation, Israel Premier Tech rather, and Vines into second on GC with just a sprint stage tomorrow. Otherwise, Tour de Jura Cycliste, a 1-1 race. Speaking of points, Cofford is second and third. Harada and Zingle in this race, they're second and third because your man from WA, Ben O'Connor, won another race. He won in Catalunya on La Molina last month. Now wins maybe his first one-day race win, Tour de Jura Cycliste. So the Quokka Roar is back in April, tuning up for Tour de Romandie, which he'll probably him against Padun and someone else. And Asia Desert Citroën must be very, very happy with him. Any other news in cycling the last few days, Benji?
I don't know. The Quokka just made me bloody deaf. I don't know. But I think there was like this event that Tour of Turkey the other day. We've spoken about the Tour of Turkey quite a bit at the end of these podcasts, but we never really mentioned the clear safety issues in this bloody race because, like a few stages ago, downhill run-ins towards a sprint, we had a video pop up yesterday of 14K to go in the stage of yesterday where the riders were literally riding through like a place where they were working on the road, and there were like signs everywhere. They had to evade everything. It's like, I don't know. Do you think that a race like that should still be ridden? Like, should
I
riders
mean,
step up more?
well, this is the thing, right? Like Turkey, I don't know if teams get money to start the race. I know that, Vuelta a San Juan, the Argentine race, that was cancelled this year, but Quickstep usually do that, and Ghana maybe did it with the Italian team. And some of the finishes there, I literally can barely watch. And I'm like, why do the teams like, and
Yeah,
especially with the Lotto, if Ewan crashes, they're all like, points aside, Benji, that's done for them. But Ewan crashes, he can't do the tour, and that's their whole tour. Like that's why it's such a sketchy tune-up race for him.
yeah, I agree in that. And it's also for Quintana, for example, who ended up crashing on a roundabout. I
Yeah,
don't know if that crash was actually related to like danger, but it's a signal, in my opinion, that when so much danger happens, also a crash. We haven't talked about the Buhani crash. The man
oh, it's
rode
terrible.
into a person that apparently has a disability, which is, yeah, it's unfortunate. And as a consequence, that person was on the road, and the peloton straight up rode into that person, a person with a yellow jacket, which I suppose to guess
Yeah,
is
they
a
didn't react
marshal,
fast enough.
tried to react late, and as a consequence was also involved in the crash. Buhani broke part of its vertebrae, if my memory
Yeah,
serves me
terrible
right.
crash.
It's like all this stuff combined. And my question there is, aren't there motorbikes ahead of the peloton that could literally go to that person that is literally standing in the middle of the road and say, go to the side or something
He
like
walked
that?
out late. It was really bad. But yeah, the marshal should have been quicker. They were just looking at them, didn't react. I feel really, really bad for Buani. He was crashed badly by Merlier last year. No one cared because his name's Nasser Buani. And
Yeah.
then this year caught up in a safety incident. Again, no one really seems to care. The guy seems to be broken his back. So I feel really bad for him. Hopefully he comes back. He seems a bit demoralized by it, understandably. But yeah, it's same with Arkea, Benji. I wouldn't have sent Quintana to this. They're good for points
Yep.
unless they're getting money to start. Like it's about the tour now for exposure. We don't need a hyper focus on points. But yeah, that's Tour of Turkey, it's been a bit up and down, but I'm glad to see Bevan. I think he's out of contract too. He's a good rider. Bevan deserves a good 2-3 year contract somewhere. I think he can perform well next year, and he probably will. Now he's going to win the GC here. But that's all from us today. Paris-Roubaix tomorrow. Sepp van Mark will note the poor guy out after our preview. He's ill, so he can't start, and then that's a big blow for Israel. Hausler's not starting because seems like he broke his collarbone. But other than that, the favourites, knock on wood, are starting Paris-Roubaix tomorrow. And I can't wait to see the big showdown in the dry. It'll be different to last year. We'll be back with the recap of that in 24 hours. Thanks to Zwift as always for supporting us and Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift. Ciao.